The whole family did. Nobody really knew how to deal with it all because it's the loss of three brothers. I'm the last man standing, so I'll never be able to understand that because I'm the eldest.
I want my life to be live with you.
Barry Gibb has carried grief for most of his life, but nothing struck him harder than the quiet, private moment he shared with Robin in the final chapter of their brotherhood, a moment he still refuses to describe in detail, even today. It wasn't a dramatic movie scene. There were no grand speeches, no final monologues, just two brothers who had lived through the highest and lowest points of fame, sitting together in silence, sharing a truth that was never meant for cameras, headlines, or the world. And whatever Robin communicated to Barry in those final days, with his presence, his expression, or the small fragments of strength he still had, stayed with Barry permanently. He has said in interviews that he can't talk about it, that it's too emotional, and that losing Robin felt like losing a part of himself he could never get back. To understand why this moment changed Barry so deeply, you have to go back to the years before Robin became sick, back to the wounds left behind when Morris died suddenly in 2003, and back to the complicated, unspoken bond that shaped the Bee Gees long before the world ever knew their names. Because for Barry and Robin, nothing about their relationship was simple. Not their childhood, not their success, not their grief, and certainly not their last days together. After Morris's death, everything shifted. The Bee Gees, a band built on three voices, three personalities, and three perspectives, became a duo overnight. The silence left by Morris wasn't just emotional, it was musical. Barry has admitted openly that losing Morris broke him, and Robin later said that the loss left their family in pieces. They coped differently. Barry retreated from the spotlight, overwhelmed with guilt and grief. Robin threw himself into work, into writing, into a schedule that kept him moving, because stopping meant facing everything he wasn't ready to feel. They loved each other deeply, but like many brothers, they struggled to express it in the same language. And so, in the years after Morris passed, a distance grew. Not hatred, not rivalry, just quiet misunderstandings, different ways of processing pain, and the natural drifting that happens when each brother tries to survive in his own way. But that distance began to close slowly in the late 2000s. Robin and Barry started talking more. They began planning music again. They spoke about unfinished dreams and the responsibility they both felt to honor Morris's memory. Barry has said that he and Robin had made peace long before Robin's illness became severe, something fans don't always know, but something Barry emphasizes whenever he talks about his brother. They were reconnecting, they were rebuilding, they were finding each other again. And then Robin got sick. At first he stayed hopeful. Family members have said that even during chemotherapy, even in hospital rooms, Robin talked about touring again, recording again, singing again. He refused to give up. He told interviewers he would beat this and spoke publicly about future plans. Barry watched this optimism with a mix of pride and heartbreak. He admired Robin's spirit, that unmistakable determination that defined him. But he also felt fear that was familiar, fear he had lived through once already when he stood beside Morris's hospital bed. This time, Barry visited more often. He stayed longer. He stayed quieter. And even though Robin had days when his energy disappeared, days when he could barely speak, and days when he drifted between clarity and exhaustion, he always reacted when Barry walked in. His face softened. He became calmer. Their old childhood closeness, the bond formed long before fame, resurfaced without either of them needing to say a word. Because Barry wasn't just a brother. He was a piece of Robin's history, the part of his life untouched by illness, success, or grief. As Robin's condition worsened, those quiet moments became more meaningful. Family members have spoken about the intimacy of those final visits, the way Barry would sit closely, the way Robin recognized him even on difficult days, and the way both men held on to a silence that spoke louder than anything else. And somewhere in those final days, in one of those visits, during one of Robin's clearer moments, something passed between them. Something private. Something emotional enough that Barry still cannot speak of it decades later. He has said it was very personal. He has said it changed him. He has said it is too painful to share. That is all he has ever revealed. No specific words, no direct quotes, no invented scenes, just the weight of something that left an imprint on him so deep that even during interviews years later, he still stops, looks downward, and gathers himself whenever Robin's final days are mentioned. To this day, Barry struggles to talk about it because losing Robin meant losing the last person on Earth who truly understood the entire journey from their childhood home in Australia to the recording studios in London and Miami, to the tragedies, the triumphs, and the unimaginable pressure of becoming one of the biggest groups in music history. And it wasn't just grief he carried, it was fear. Barry has said many times that after Robin passed, he felt lonely in a way he had never experienced, that performing alone felt wrong, that singing Bee Gees songs without Morris and Robin produced a pain worse than grief. He even said in one interview that he felt he died inside the day Robin left. It wasn't a single sentence Robin spoke that haunted him. It wasn't a dramatic goodbye. It was everything left unsaid, everything they survived, everything they regretted, and everything they had finally begun to rebuild before time ran out. It was the realization that when Robin closed his eyes for the last time, Barry became the last surviving Bee Gee, the last voice, the last memory, the last witness to their shared world. And that truth, more than anything, is what Barry could never forget. When Robin passed in May 2012, the world mourned a music legend. But Barry didn't just lose a brother, he lost the last person who shared the entire blueprint of his life. The memories, the dreams, the arguments, the rise, the collapse, and every private moment that existed far from the public eye. No matter how close he was to his family, no matter how adored he was by fans across generations, there was suddenly a silence around him that nothing could fill, because for the first time since childhood, Barry Gibb was truly alone. People saw the tributes, they saw the interviews, they saw the speeches, but what they didn't see, what Barry never lets the cameras near, was the guilt. Not guilt over actions, not guilt over choices, but the same invisible guilt that often follows the last surviving sibling in a family that has lost too much. He felt he should have done more. He felt he should have seen more. He felt that maybe, somehow, there was something he could have changed. This kind of grief is too complicated for words, and Barry has said in multiple interviews that talking about Robin's final days destroys him emotionally. He avoids specifics not because there is a secret to hide, but because the pain is still sharp, sharper than time should allow. And it wasn't just losing Robin, it was losing Morris years earlier, long before Barry was emotionally ready to process it. He once said he never recovered from Morris's passing, and that grief made Robin's illness even harder to face. The truth is this: Barry never stopped loving his brothers. Barry never stopped trying to protect them, and Barry never expected to outlive them. After Robin's passing, Barry described himself as numb. He said waking up without his brothers felt like a different world. He said performing their songs alone felt unnatural, like the harmonies were ghosts he could hear but no longer reach. Those aren't metaphors, they're Barry's own words, and they reveal something the public rarely understands. Barry wasn't just the eldest brother, he was the emotional anchor of the Bee Gees, the one who held the structure together even when the relationships strained. But a structure cannot stand when its columns fall away. The first visible moment that showed the world how deeply he was hurting came during Robin's funeral tribute. Barry stood at the podium, speaking about their childhood, their teenage dreams, and how Robin always carried a spark that nothing could dim. But throughout that speech, his voice shook, not with performance, but with loss he was barely containing. Later, he admitted that at times during that period, he didn't want to make music again. He didn't want to sing. He didn't want to step onto a stage where his brothers' voices once stood beside him. He said he felt dead inside, a statement powerful enough that reporters paused, unsure how to follow it. His family, especially his wife Linda and his children, became the only source of grounding he had left. They encouraged him to create again, not to replace his brothers, but to honor what they had built together. And that's when something unexpected happened. As the months passed, Barry began to understand something he had never fully seen during their years of work. Robin had been looking toward him the whole time, even when they disagreed, even when they took breaks from each other, even when life pulled them in separate emotional directions. It became clear to Barry, painfully clear, that Robin admired him more than he ever said aloud, that Robin depended on him more than he showed, that Robin believed Barry was the one who could keep the legacy alive after they were gone. This wasn't speculation. This was something Barry pieced together through old conversations, family memories, and Robin's own behavior throughout his illness, his optimism, his talk of future plans, his belief that the music should continue. Robin never said, "You must carry our legacy." He didn't need to. It was already written in the way he lived his final years, and Barry felt the weight of that understanding as heavily as any last words. In the years that followed, Barry slowly re-entered music, not out of desire, but out of duty. He felt he owed it to Morris. He felt he owed it to Robin. He felt he owed it to the fans who carried the Bee Gees through decades of change. When he finally performed to Love Somebody on stage again alone,
Love somebody the way I love you.
the audience saw him wipe tears off his face. It wasn't performance, it was memory, raw, unfiltered, and unmistakable. And he said after that show, "It felt like they were with me." This is why Robin's final days stay with him, not because of any specific sentence, not because of a dramatic declaration, but because in those last moments, Barry saw the truth that had always existed beneath their careers, their disagreements, and their reconciliations. Robin didn't need to speak his last message. Barry already understood it, that the bond they shared wasn't broken by illness or time or even death, and that the legacy of their music and their brotherhood now rested in his hands alone. When Robin passed, something inside Barry didn't simply break, it collapsed. For the first time in his life, Barry could no longer hear the harmonies that once guided him. He had lived with Robin and Morris's voices surrounding him since childhood, on stage, in studios, in rehearsal rooms, in the back of cars, even echoing through hotel hallways in the early morning hours. The Bee Gees were not just a band, they were a living system of three parts that breathed together. And when Robin's voice went silent, that system ended. Officially, irreversibly. In a way Barry was completely unprepared for. He admitted publicly that he felt paralyzed, that he would walk into a room and half expect Robin to be there, or Morris leaning against a wall making a sarcastic comment. He said the loneliness was like a physical force, something that hit him whenever he tried to sing. Most people saw a legendary musician grieving, but Barry felt something far deeper. He felt like the last page of a story no one else could understand. He once described his home in Miami as feeling empty, even though his family was with him. It wasn't because he lacked love, it was because he lacked the one thing that had defined his entire identity since childhood, the sound of his brothers. Their harmonies weren't just musical, they were emotional, they were the shape of his world. And now he was the only one left who remembered every detail, the early mistakes, the long bus rides, the tiny Australian performances where barely anyone showed up, the rise through the 1960s, the reinvention in the 1970s, the comeback in the 1980s, the battles, the reconciliations, the triumphs. Robin and Morris took those memories with them. Barry was left as the sole witness. This is the part of the story fans rarely see, that Barry almost stopped singing entirely. In interviews he said he didn't want to perform Bee Gees songs because it felt like I was singing to ghosts. Those were his exact words, ghosts. That's how deeply he felt their absence. At one point, he even said he didn't know if he belonged in music anymore. For a man who had written some of the most iconic songs in history, this wasn't dramatic language, it was his truth. Because performing wasn't just work, it was a reminder of everything he had lost. But something else began to happen in the months that followed. Barry started receiving letters, videos, and messages from fans all over the world, people who had grown up with the Bee Gees, people who used their songs at weddings and funerals, people who said the music had shaped their lives. Something about those messages began pulling Barry out of his grief. Fans weren't asking him to move on, they were asking him to keep his brothers alive through the music. He felt a responsibility, a real, heavy, emotional responsibility to honor Morris and Robin, not by replacing them, but by becoming a living memory of what the Bee Gees had created together. Family members also encouraged him gently, especially his wife Linda, who has always been his emotional anchor. She reminded him that he wasn't just a singer, he was the last carrier of a legacy that needed him. Slowly, Barry began experimenting with music again, quietly, privately, sometimes alone in a room late at night, sometimes with his children sitting nearby. And something changed. He realized that singing the old songs didn't erase the pain, but it transformed it. It shifted grief into gratitude. It took absence and turned it into connection. And one day, Barry stepped on stage again. It wasn't easy. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. During those early performances, you could see him pause, eyes closing for a moment too long, as if he could feel Robin and Morris beside him. He later admitted that sometimes he did feel them, not literally, but emotionally, through memories so vivid that they felt alive. What happened next surprised everyone, including Barry. Audiences weren't just listening, they were healing with him. Fans cried openly during the shows. Barry cried with them. It stopped being a concert and became something else, a shared tribute to two brothers who shaped the soundtrack of millions of lives. That connection slowly rebuilt him, not fully. Grief never disappears, but enough for him to keep moving, enough for him to breathe again, enough for him to live again, and enough for him to make a decision he once thought he could never make. He would continue performing Bee Gees songs, not because he wanted to sing alone, but because it was the only way to keep Morris and Robin alive in the world. The legacy did not end, because Barry chose not to let it end. But even as he found the strength to carry the music forward, one truth continued to follow him everywhere, a truth that shaped every performance, every interview, every tribute. Barry never forgot Robin's final days, not the atmosphere, not the emotion, not the weight of what was unsaid, because it wasn't one final sentence that stayed with him. It was the feeling of a lifetime, a brotherhood that survived fame, loss, distance, reconciliation, and finally, an ending that Barry was never ready for. And that feeling would ultimately lead him to the most emotional realization of his life, a realization he finally shared years later when he admitted something the world never expected, a truth about Robin, a truth about himself, and a truth about the Bee Gees that left fans stunned. As the years passed, Barry began to speak more honestly about the emotional cost of being the last surviving Gibb brother, not for shock value, not for attention, but because time had softened the rawest parts of his grief, leaving behind something he could finally put into words. And when he did, the world understood something they had overlooked for decades. Barry hadn't just lost Robin. He hadn't just lost Morris. He had lost the two people who shaped every part of who he was, the melody, the harmony, the identity he carried from childhood all the way into superstardom. During an interview years later, Barry said something that revealed the truth he had been carrying. "I can't describe what it's like to lose your brothers. I don't think I've ever recovered. Not moved on, not healed, not accepted, never recovered." Because for Barry, grief didn't fade. It became a companion, quiet on some days, overwhelming on others, but always present. And as he spoke more openly, a pattern emerged, one that made sense only when viewed through the full arc of their lives. Barry wasn't haunted by something Robin said. He was haunted by everything Robin was, haunted in the sense of memory, presence, unfinished conversations, dreams they didn't get to complete, plans they never had time to rebuild after their reconciliation. Robin was the brother who dreamed out loud, the brother who pushed through illness, through exhaustion, through fear, always convinced there was another performance ahead, another project, another chapter. And when Barry watches old clips, listens to old recordings, or walks past the instruments they once shared, he doesn't hear a ghost. He hears a life that ended too early, a voice that still feels close, a bond that refuses to dissolve. One of the most emotional statements Barry has ever made came years after Robin's death, when he revealed, "Sometimes I think they're still here, and sometimes I wish I wasn't." He didn't mean it literally. He meant that the pain of being the last one standing can feel heavier than the years of fame that once lifted them, because the Bee Gees weren't a normal band, they weren't colleagues, they weren't collaborators, they were brothers first, and everything else second, and that is why Robin's final days never leave Barry. Not because of a single moment, but because that moment symbolized something final, the closing of a door that had been opened since they were children, singing in small Australian clubs with nothing but ambition and natural harmony. Barry has also revealed something else. When he sings now, when he performs Bee Gees songs on stage, he doesn't feel alone. He feels surrounded by memories, some joyful, some painful, all impossible to forget. He once said that performing words, "How deep is your love?" or Massachusetts brings Robin and Morris back to him in ways he can't explain. "They're with me," he said, "not physically, but they're with me." And that is the truth fans rarely hear. Robin's memory is not a shadow that follows Barry. It is a presence that anchors him. Because Robin believed, until his last days, that the music must continue, that the work they created together meant something to millions of people. And Barry carries that belief the way Robin carried hope during his illness, quietly, stubbornly, and with a sense of duty he never asked for but cannot let go of. This is why Barry performs even when it hurts, why he speaks about Robin even when his voice shakes, why he returns to the studio even when the harmonies feel incomplete. Because he knows the Bee Gees were never just a band. They were a bond, one built on love, rivalry, survival, tragedy, reinvention, and an unbreakable emotional thread that still wraps itself around Barry's heart. Barry once described Robin as the other half of me, a statement that explained everything he could never say directly about their final moments. When Robin died, Barry didn't lose a partner. He lost the mirror he had looked into his whole life. And that is why he cannot forget those final days. Not because of a line spoken or a dramatic goodbye, but because in those last moments, Barry saw exactly what Robin meant to him. A brother, a survivor, a rival, a friend, a piece of himself. And even now, whenever Barry steps onto a stage, closes his eyes, and sings the opening lines of a Bee Gees classic, he feels it. Robin never really left. Not in the ways that matter, not in the music, not in the memories, not in the part of Barry that still looks for his brothers when the lights go down and the harmony fades. Because grief doesn't erase love, it preserves it. And Barry Gibb's entire life is proof of that. If you're still here, thank you truly. Stories like this aren't easy. They stay with you. They remind us that behind the music we love are real people, real families, real hearts that broke long before the world ever knew it. And if the life of Robin Gibb touched you, if the strength of Barry Gibb moved you, if their story made you feel something deep in your chest, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. This is RetroWaves, a place for the songs, the memories, and the untold moments that shaped the artists we grew up with. If you'd like to walk with us through more stories like this, you're always welcome here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering Robin and Morris with us. And thank you for keeping the music and the brothers alive.